A dying man lies motionless in his bed, his face pale and gaunt, barely clinging to the last threads of life. His trembling hand holds a quill pen, guided, or rather forced, by another hand that grips his wrist with unsettling firmness. To his right, a Jesuit priest in dark robes manipulates the dying man's hand, ensuring each stroke of the pen serves their purpose. To his left, another Jesuit distracts him, holding a crucifix before his fading eyes, keeping his attention away from the document being forged in his name. The dying man's gaze is fixed on the cross, unaware that he is signing away everything he owns. But what inspired this shocking scene? Who created this controversial masterpiece? And why did this painting cause one of the greatest scandals in 19th century European art? The painting is Birds of Prey, also known as The Will, created by Belgian artist Alexandre Struys in 1876. And its story is one of personal tragedy, religious corruption, and a society torn apart by culture wars. Alexandre Theodore Honoré Struys was born in 1852 in Berchem, Belgium, into a family of craftsmen. His father was a master glass painter from Holland, and young Alexander showed extraordinary artistic talent from an early age. By the age of 6, he was already a student at the Academy of Dordrecht, a remarkable achievement that foreshadowed his future as one of Belgium's most controversial painters. Struys trained under prominent masters, studying biblical scene painting and romantic historical painting at Antwerp's Royal Academy of Fine Arts. In 1871, he and his friend, painter Jan van Beers, embarked on an ambitious journey to France and England, hoping to sell their works and establish themselves in the art world. The trip was a disaster. They barely made enough money to return home, but failure would prove to be a catalyst. Back in Belgium, Struys began to observe the growing tensions in his homeland, a bitter conflict between those who believed the Catholic Church should control every aspect of Belgian life, and those who believed in a secular modern state. This wasn't just political theatre. It was tearing families apart, dividing communities, and destroying lives. And then something happened that would change Struys forever, something deeply personal, something that would fuel the creation of his most famous and controversial work. Jesuits had persuaded Struys' own uncle to sign over all his possessions to them. We don't know all the details of what happened, whether his uncle was on his deathbed, whether he was coerced, or whether he was simply manipulated during a moment of vulnerability. But the result was devastating for Struys' family. Everything his uncle had worked for, everything that should have passed to his relatives, was instead handed over to the Jesuit order. For Struys, this wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about seeing his own family victimized by an institution that claimed to represent God's love and mercy. It was about watching powerful men in religious robes exploit a vulnerable dying person for their own gain. It was about witnessing corruption wrapped in the language of salvation. The young artist seethed with anger and grief, and he decided to do what artists do best: transform his pain into art that would expose the truth. To understand why Struys' painting caused such an explosive reaction, we need to understand the Belgium of 1876. The country was in the midst of what historians call the School War. Though no shots were fired, it was a brutal cultural conflict that would define Belgian politics for generations. The conflict was between the Conservative Catholic Party and the Secular Liberal Party, coming to a head during the First School War from 1879 to 1884. But the tensions had been building for years before that, and in 1876, when Struys unveiled his painting, Belgium was a powder keg waiting to explode. The Liberals believed that the Catholic Church had too much power over Belgian society, particularly in education. In the 1840s, over 50% of the Belgian population was illiterate, and by the end of the 1870s, 40% still couldn't read. Liberals blamed this on an educational system controlled by priests, who, they argued, were more interested in religious indoctrination than in teaching children practical skills. The Catholics, meanwhile, saw the liberals as dangerous radicals, trying to destroy the moral foundation of Belgian society. They believed that without religious education, children would grow up as godless hedonists who would tear apart the social fabric. The conflict became so intense that towns would have two of everything: a Catholic butcher and a liberal butcher, a Catholic grocer and a liberal grocer. Where you shopped wasn't just about convenience, it was a political statement about which side you supported in this cultural war. Into this volatile atmosphere came Alexandre Struys with his painting, Birds of Prey. The title itself is devastating. Birds of Prey compares these religious men to vultures and hawks, predators who circle the dying, waiting to feed on what remains. Struys makes no attempt at subtlety. This is an accusation painted in oil on canvas for all to see. The alternative title, God is Dead, is even more provocative. It suggests that whatever God these men claim to serve has been murdered by their actions. Their corruption has killed the very faith they profess to represent. When Struys exhibited Birds of Prey in 1876, the reaction was explosive. The painting created a scandal, dividing Belgian society along the same fault lines that would soon erupt into the school war. For anti-clerical liberals, the painting was a revelation. Finally, someone had the courage to depict in visual form what they had been saying for years. The Catholic Church, they argued, was not the benevolent institution it claimed to be. Behind the pious words and holy symbols were men motivated by greed and power, willing to exploit the most vulnerable members of society. The painting hit home for many people due to the coinciding political discord between liberals and clericals. Struys's personal tragedy resonated because it wasn't unique. Across Belgium, families had similar stories: relatives who had been persuaded to leave everything to the church, children who had been disinherited in favour of religious orders, widows who had been convinced to hand over their savings to ensure their deceased husband's salvation. For Catholics, the painting was an outrageous slander, a vicious attack on the church and the dedicated men who served it. They saw Struys as a hate-monger, using art to spread anti-Catholic propaganda. The painting, they argued, bore no resemblance to reality and was designed solely to inflame prejudice against the church during an already tense political moment. The controversy made Struys famous overnight. Everyone wanted to see the painting that had caused such outrage. People lined up to view it, and newspapers devoted column after column to debating its merits and its message. The aftermath of the scandal reveals something fascinating about the art world and society. Rather than destroying Struys's career, the controversy launched it into the stratosphere. The year after the scandal, Struys was named a professor at the Weimar Saxon Grand Ducal Art School, following in the footsteps of other prominent Belgian artists. This German appointment is particularly significant. It shows that beyond Belgium's borders, Struys was recognised not as a troublemaker, but as a serious artist with important things to say. The painting's technical mastery was undeniable. The composition, the use of light and shadow, the emotional intensity of the figures. Whatever one thought of its message, Birds of Prey was a work of genuine artistic achievement. Struys later became known for his socially conscious work, befriending other artists involved in social issues. He painted the poor, the suffering, and the marginalized. Some critics referred to him as the painter of misery and pain, a label that was meant as criticism, but which Struys might have worn as a badge of honor. He believed art should confront uncomfortable truths, not simply provide beautiful decoration for the walls of the wealthy. He would go on to have a distinguished career, eventually becoming head of the Royal Drawing Academy in Mechelen and serving in prominent positions in Belgian artistic institutions. He lived until 1941, dying just as Europe was once again consumed by war and darkness. Today, BirdsOfPrey resides in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's somewhat ironic that this quintessentially Belgian painting, created to comment on Belgian politics and society, now sits in Russia.